2023 will go down as one of the most memorable years in video games for me. Any year that has Baldur's Gate 3 in a year should be celebrated. In addition, there were a ton of surprising announcements for games currently in the works. Out of nowhere, Koei Tecmo decided to remake one of their Romance of the Three Kingdoms games with Romance of the Three Kingdoms VIII. Considering that Koei Tecmo is one of the few publishers who have strayed away from making flat-out remakes, it was a surprising move and has opened a ton of new possibilities. In all honesty, I have no clue what to make of this or what to honestly expect, but I figured now would be a good time to take a look at the original and to see if it still holds up. Heck, maybe we can also figure out why the 8th iteration in particular is being targeted for a remake. When you start up a game, you have an absolute god tier list of scenarios to choose from. Selecting any of these time periods will show you the scenarios you can choose from within. In total, Romance of the Three Kingdoms VIII has a staggering 54 freaking scenarios. That amount easily eclipses any prior and future Three Kingdoms game in just the sheer amount of possible starts alone. Unfortunately, I don't believe all these scenarios will return in the remake at launch and will probably be sold off as DLC. With that depressing fact aside, we are going to be doing two different scenarios here, one as an officer and one as a ruler. To keep the time period as similar as possible, we are starting with Zhang Liao under Dong Zhuo in October 189 and the Hero of Chaos Cao Cao in January 190. Just to mention as well, you can play this game with up to 8 characters at a time, which is an incredibly fun time if you can manage to grab some friends and pull it off. Depending on what scenario you pick will determine the opening and if you'll see any additional cutscenes. Compared to future entries, there is very little in the way of graphical fidelity, but I still like the presentation here. It gives you an overview on how things got to where they are currently and who the major players are. As Zhang Liao, I do not have any positions of significance under Dong Zhuo. Instead, I am a lowly vassal under the city controlled by the prefect Dong Ming. Every 3 months, a council is held which is used to enact various policies and to determine what the domestic tasks are for the officers within the city. As an officer of my current rank, I can suggest one action as well as suggest my domestic policy. For Cao Cao, I have 6 actions that I can perform as well as hear suggestions from my underlings. Overall, this system works, although I do wish that you didn't have to wait 3 months to move officers to other cities. Future games corrected this, but that's for another time. With Dong Ming as my prefect, I was given the glorious tasks of farming the land. My goal is to increase it by at least 30 by the beginning of the next council. For those of you keeping score at home, that gives me about 3 months to accomplish this momentous task. At this point, what you ultimately want to do as an officer is in your hands. Sure, I can do the honorable thing and do the best I can, but I can also mess around and talk to other officers. Heck, I can just travel the world and find other people and conspire with the enemy. Or I can say screw it and start up a vagabond unit that eventually settles down to another city. It's possibilities like this that make Romance of the Three Kingdoms one of my favorite series of all time. With that said, we are going to keep it boring here and work as hard as I can to rise through the ranks. For an update on Cao Cao's side, I'm in a very interesting position here. While we do have a coalition that is against Dong Zhuo, my main focus is going to be on defense as I do not have the money nor the manpower to support an eventual attack on my one and only city. This involves drafting every quarter as well as assigning a majority of my officers to invest in the marketplace. The rest of them can also improve the farmland and keep order. Similar to many other titles in the series, there are historical events that will play out throughout the course of the game. As Zhang Liao, I was able to see the forced abdication that Dong Zhuo placed on Emperor Shao and the execution that eventually followed. The way these scenes are set up are kind of like a play being performed in front of you. Even fictional events that you can come across end up having this sort of presentation. Obviously, this isn't much from a visual fidelity perspective, but it does provide its own unique charm and style. The life of a domestic officer can get me so far as I eventually need to participate in battle. My first battle came as a defensive relief force to defend Puyang against the forces of Liu Dai. As a single unit, there's not much to talk about here. In this battle, I can only control my unit, which takes a while considering the amount of units on both sides. Turn times can be incredibly slow and tedious when a ton of AI controlled units are participating. Participating in any battle as reinforcements also prevents you from participating in any of the pre-battle shenanigans. If you are the main army and depending on your rank, you can choose who you want to fight in the battle as well as who will be the tactician and the unit type everyone will be. As Zhang Liao, I was able to participate in an assault as the main army as the tactician under fellow officer Gao Shun. As a tactician, I'm able to set up the main tactic to be one of several, all granting their own benefits and drawbacks, as well as set up the ploys for the main commander to use. In a defensive battle, you can also set up traps which can be devastating if triggered by the enemy. This is all based on what the tactician ultimately knows and is war and intelligence stat. Since Zhang Liao is really good at war and has decent intelligence, I have a bit to play around with here. I also like these pre-battle meetings as it can help to analyze the situation and figure out your approach. As for the battles themselves, it's all turn-based goodness here. As you move your troops and engage with the enemy, you can perform a basic attack or try your luck with a variety of tactics that you'll learn. Some of these can be incredibly OP and will wipe an entire unit away if performed successfully. Others have a level of risk to them, such as creating fire or even trying to confuse a unit. Both can not only fail, but also critically fail and have dire consequences. It's this level of risk versus reward that is important to consider, as sometimes a normal attack is the better solution than a high risk, high reward one. There's also other factors to consider, such as terrain, morale, troop type, and whatever status ailments the unit is currently dealing with. Despite how complex it may appear at first glance, it's actually quite easy to grasp the battle mode's concepts. Duels also have a chance of occurring during and outside of battle. These have always been a staple of Romance of the Three Kingdoms with varying degrees of success. My personal favorite will also be the duels in Romance of the Three Kingdoms X for how strategic and epic it can get. For 8, the duels here are fine, but nothing too special. You can pick your action between each round and see the results ultimately play out. Other times you can just be watching 2 AI controlled opponents duke it out. One thing I did notice, however, is the lack of any tournaments that were present in 7, which is a disappointing to not see their inclusion here. If I had to make one complaint, it would be with the battle AI, because my goodness, the amount of times the AI refuses to press an advantage and somehow cough up an easy victory is quite absurd. It's a lot worse if you're expecting the reinforcing AI to actually help you and make some good decisions either offensively or defensively. It has the potential to simultaneously make battles easier and harder at the same time. Some wild stuff here. As Cao Cao, I continue to push further and further to gain more control of the land. When I achieved a certain number of territories, I was given a promotion to Duke and then eventually to King. Viewing the Emperor as a tool rather than a way to restore the Han Dynasty, my goal was to establish my own dynasty when the Emperor ultimately decided to step down. That eventually happened and the Wei Dynasty was born. Along with my military pursuits and ambitions, I still made it an effort to speak with my fellow officers, as I grew close with several that I eventually swore an oath of brotherhood with both Tao Ren and Xu Huang. This was through years of talking to each other, going on hunting trips, and forming bonds by talking to people in person, something that doesn't really happen nowadays. Forming bonds not only ensures their loyalty, but also gives a bit of a bonus towards morale if the two fight side by side in battle. For Zhang Liao, things were not so rosy. Due to the utter incompetence of his fellow officers, Zhang Liao was captured by Ma Teng despite a valiant effort of defense. Despite this, Ma Teng saw just how capable Zhang Liao is and the many victories he can bring for him. He was then given a fairly decent rank of 6 ranked, with 9 ranked being at the bottom. Unfortunately, this is where we will end the story, as it gets pretty boring from here on out. Despite battle after battle and continuously overperforming on domestic tasks, I could not get to become a prefect. Instead, the highest level I achieved was Warlord, which is basically military advisor to a prefect. This allowed me to schedule attacks exactly the way I wanted to, but not much in domestic ordering outside of the suggestions I can give. Eventually, I finally united the land under Cao Cao, and the officers below me expected to finally be able to relax. Unfortunately for them, this isn't the way of the hero of ambition, as the goal is to continuously beef up the army and stay vigilant for external threats. All well and good, but this ends up pushing the Wei Dynasty to its limits, and the world is in turmoil once again after Cao Cao passes away. This is just one of the many endings, by the way, and I'm certain if I played as a more benevolent ruler like Liu Bei, or even a more ruthless warlord like Dong Zhuo, things would have been much different. The epilogues in Romance of the Three Kingdoms are always awesome to see, and this entry is no different. And last but not least, we have to talk about Officer Creator. This was always one of my favorite features as it allows you to create any type of officer and interact with the various figures of history and fiction. Outside of being able to determine the stats for your character, you can also get to choose his or her personality type, which helps to determine who they are able to better get along with. Unlike other entries of the series, you're only given a set number of bonus points, so you can't just max out your officer with 99 or 100 of everything. Still, it's a fun little feature I enjoy always playing around with, especially if I'm feeling experimental. Overall, despite some of the game's flaws, it is still one of the best Romance of the Three Kingdoms entries. The amount of scenarios is staggering, and coupling this with officer play has a near limitless amount of potential playthroughs. The various roles you can play is a ton of fun and allows for a ton of gameplay opportunities. The only real major flaw this game has is with very poor battle AI, which can get frustrating as you try to compensate for your allies' mistakes. The battles themselves are turn-based goodness, although the AI can put a damper on things at times. Now, as for the remake itself, I honestly have no clue what to expect. It can be an overall good time or a pale imitation of what came before it. Overall, I'm just curious as to what they'll keep and what they'll ultimately drop. Something tells me that 8-player couch co-op, multiplayer, and 54 scenarios will not be included at launch. Either way, only time will tell, and we still have this amazing title to fall back on. Thank you guys for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.